The Sony FX30. Should you get it? I have been shooting a lot with this camera, so I have a lot of things that I've liked about it and a lot of things that I don't like about it. So immediately, let's start with the things that I don't like about it. So number one, no false color. I mean, what's the deal with that? I mean, this is supposed to be a cinema camera and there's no false color. Now, I know that Sony did release an app that does allow you to have false color, but you have to install it on a phone and then you get false color. But why doesn't this have it immediately inside the camera? It's super annoying. And having shot on Blackmagic cameras, I was just spoiled with having this false color. False color, if you don't know, is a exposure guide that allows you to easily, in my opinion, expose correctly. Of course, you have zebras that are built into the Sony FX30, but it's not the same. I love false color. People, filmmakers here on YouTube have even created workarounds using LUTs to have a false color LUT on it. So that's something I want to look into. Maybe I could download some of their false colors LUTs and see if that's a good workaround. But if you can import it as a LUT, I don't know why you can't just have this as a preset here. Come on, Sony. Another con about shooting on the FX30 has been the battery. I haven't updated the firmware, but I have read online that people who have updated the firmware, now they cannot use third-party batteries. You have to use the Sony branded battery. And it's not that they won't work or the camera won't power on now, it's just that you won't be able to see the battery indicator. It won't display. And I have read online that some people have said that you can actually use the app and get around this. And it's not a huge con, but it's kind of annoying, especially if you had invested in third-party batteries. I know there are pros and cons to that in using the original manufacturer's battery. Not a huge con, but I wish the battery did last a little longer for the price you pay on it. You are able to connect an external battery through a USB port, so that's nice. But overall, I would have liked better, a long-lasting battery. What I'm getting into is possibly getting an external type of battery like a V-mount, but of course you still need to have the actual Sony battery in there. Another con is the inability to have external recording to an SSD like a lot of other cameras allow. You also have CFast Express Type A, which is not as common as Type B, and then the cards are really expensive, but you could also shoot an SDX. So there are certain modes on the Sony FX30 that you can only shoot with higher capacity cards. So the ability to shoot on an SSD would have been great, but you don't get that here. A lot of cameras now, especially cinema cameras, allow you to do this, so you don't have to pay these high prices for these cards that are kind of tied to the camera, whereas SSDs, you can, if you switch out a camera a couple of years later, you're able to still use it. Not a huge problem though. Prices of these cards sometimes go down, so that's something that you can look at, and then you could be able to unlock some of the higher frame rates like DCI 4K or even the 48 frames a second. I mean, I have been looking potentially at switching cameras, even though I haven't decided that. But if there's any con, the biggest con is the inability for this camera to shoot open gate. And if you don't know what open gate is, it's basically the ability to shoot with the full width of your sensor without having it cropped into 16:9. You could shoot the full resolution of your sensor, and this allows you to have more flexibility if you need to crop for vertical videos, etc., etc. A lot of videos on open gate. It's not a secret that it's really great. Every time that I see like Panasonic has it, or Fujifilm has it, or even Blackmagic now has it, it just gets me really jealous, and I really wish that Sony had the ability to do that. And if there's any reason I upgraded, it's for that reason alone. And there's so much opportunity in open gate. It's super disappointing that Sony doesn't have this. And from reading online, it looks like it is probably a hardware limitation that you couldn't probably upgrade this through a firmware. It'd probably have to be for a potential like FX30 version 2. That's disappointing. One thing that you should take note, if you shoot a lot of content and you shoot a lot of vertical content, that's something to consider, that this camera does not allow, as of today, open gate recording. Now, to stop being negative, here are some things that I really love about this camera. Number one being the build quality. This is so good. This is one of the best looking cameras and one of the best designed cameras that I have ever shot with. It's not exactly a mirrorless body. It's not exactly a cube. It's this weird, beautiful hybrid in-between thing. Not a hybrid, but specifically geared toward video. Number one, the build. Out of any camera in this price class, I think this is number one in my opinion. One reason to trade in this camera would be the open gate, but if there's one good reason to keep this camera, it's the autofocus. The autofocus is really incredible. What everybody says about it is true. It has this fantastic way to just lock on exactly on what you want it to without having to worry about it. And if you're a solo shooter, that is really important. And I would say that if I had to pick one, do you want open gate or autofocus? I mean, autofocus is not as cool, but it is more important slightly than open gate in my opinion. And Sony is the best. And that's not to say that I'm sure some other manufacturers like Panasonic and Fuji are doing a great job trying to catch up. But right now, from what I've seen, my anecdotal experience, it looks like Sony is really great at that. Another thing I really like about the Sony FX30 is the S-Cinetone profile. And I would like to potentially make a video about just all the different profiles that give you really good cinematic colors. The Sony S-Cinetone has a beautiful look just right out of camera if you don't want to worry too much about color grading. There's also other profiles that I really like that give you good cinema quality right off the bat. Of course, another good thing is the S-Log3, which allows you to have very high dynamic range. But these S-Cinetone profiles, which are just unique to Sony, I know other cameras like Fuji have film simulations and Panasonic does, but S-Cinetone is a unique little thing, and you have to be very careful about exposing it. But once you get it right, the colors out of it are really beautiful, and you can do a light grade from the S-Cinetone out of camera, but it just gives you a great starting off point. Another big pro that a lot of people don't talk about just in terms of just having a Sony camera, and it's not just for the FX30, is something called clear image zoom. And it is this algorithmic based upscaling feature that allows you to push in just a little bit. And I can't believe how many times I've actually used this tool just when I'm like using a prime lens and I need to get a little closer. From what I've seen, it doesn't really degrade the image. It has a great algorithm, or I'm not sure how they're doing it, but they do a fantastic job in giving you and allowing you to punch in a little bit more without losing a lot of quality or resolution. It's really underrated. So if you have a lot of wide angle lenses that are primes and you can't really push in, you can use the clear image zoom, and this has saved me and allowed me to reframe things that I wouldn't have otherwise, because I'm not sure if other cameras really have a feature like this, but so far I've really enjoyed this feature. So overall, I feel like there have been a lot more pros than there have been cons, even though the open gate has my eye wandering at other things. But other than that, it's a pretty solid camera, especially for solo shooters with the autofocus. So you can't really go wrong with it. And there's no such thing as a perfect camera, so just know that. And if it wasn't for open gate, I don't think I really would have anything more than annoyances. But open gate is something that is becoming more and more important. So it's something I'm thinking about, but maybe it's not the deciding factor to trade in this camera for something else, because so far I have liked all the other features that this offers.